The Entertainment Software Rating Board, or the ESRB, is a self-regulatory organization established in 1994 that assigns age and content ratings to indicate the age appropriateness of video games in North America. Today, we are looking at the top 10 gore classics on DOS and Windows 95 that those of us who were lucky to be born before the turn of the century got to experience in its rawest form. Before we begin, I would like to ask everyone watching to like, share, and comment on the video. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to always get the latest Marvelous Gamers videos. With all that said, let's get started. Doom, 1993, at number 1 is quite literally one of the games that started it all. Doom is a first-person shooter game developed and published by id Software for MS-DOS. You play the role of Doom Guy, a space marine, and plow through hordes of undead humans and invading demons. The game takes you on a wild adventure from the moons of Mars to the literal depths of hell. Doom was one of the first games in the genre to have 2.5D graphics, that is, 2D graphics simulated to look like a 3D environment. The game had some of the most realistic violence for its time, which sent any parent who had the misfortune of witnessing their child playing Doom for the first time into a pearl-clutching, hysterical frenzy. Doom had graphic environmental elements, such as impaled corpses, severed heads on stakes, and body parts hanging from the ceiling. Enemies were graphically dismembered with explosives and gunfire, reduced to nothing but a pile of giblets. This blood-splattering game's realistic use of violence, and satanic imagery caused a lot of public outcry over contemporary moral degradation and was one of the catalysts for the creation of the ESRB, which gave Doom one of the first 17 plus mature or M rating. Despite the backlash, Doom is considered the father of the FPS genre, prompting the rise in 3D, FPS, and online multiplayer games. With an entire generation of games trying to emulate Doom's AI and design, it is easily one of the most influential games ever made.
Superb. Finish it. Johnny Cage wins.
Mortal Kombat, 1993. Next up is another game that caused the morality meltdown of the 90s. Mortal Kombat, the game that spawned the highest-selling fighting game franchise of the same name, which has sold over 100 million total, was developed and published by Midway Games for arcades, but was later released by Acclaim Entertainment for all home platforms. The MS-DOS port retained all the gore from the original arcade, including the brutal finishing moves, or fatality. These fatalities included ripping out beating hearts and taking off your opponent's head with the spine attached. There is blood spewing out of characters as they take damage as well. The game was the most popular fighting game out there, and when it was ported to DOS, it was all that kids wanted. As you can imagine, parents all around were mortified by its macabre nature, and eventually, the government had to get involved. After many hearings concerned with the realistic violence in games like Mortal Kombat and their corruption of society, the ESRB was established to control who got to play these games. So every time you weren't allowed to buy a new age Mortal Kombat disc at the game store because you were too young, you had the OG game to thank for it. Harvester, 1996. Next, for number 3, we are going on a harvest trip. Harvester was developed by DigiFX Interactive for the DOS and was a point-and-click adventure set in the fictional Texas town of Harvest circa early 1950s. You play Steve, an amnesiac who is manipulated into committing brutal and extremely violent acts at the behest of the cult known as the Order of the Harvest Moon. The game shows sequences of gruesome murders, ritualistic mutilation, and revolting scenes of cannibalism. The game was considered a cynical assault on social norms and religion. Obviously, it was rated M for mature by the ESRB, and Germany went as far as to ban the game entirely. Despite its ordinary return commercially, Harvester's boundary-shattering story established a new peak for gory, yet uncompromising storytelling in the adventure genre. The game is quite often cited as one of the most violent games of all time, and has since garnered a cult following, hopefully not the harvesting serial killer cult kind. Phantasmagoria, 1995. Next up, number 4 is another point-and-click adventure that literally has gore in its name. Phantasmagoria was released by Sierra in 1995 for MS-DOS. Unlike Harvester, Phantasmagoria had a massive budget and spanned 7 whole discs. Stern, for the unenlightened, that is what GTA 5 required to run. The horror game follows Adrienne, who moves into a remote mansion owned by an alleged serial killer. The story features extensive, high-definition, full-motion video scenes depicting graphic mutilation and near-explicit sexual violence. This wildly transgressive content led to immediate controversy. The game was banned in Australia after being refused a distribution classification, and it faced widespread protests from religious and family groups in the US, who successfully pressured some major retailers like CompUSA to refuse stocking it. Despite the negative press, Phantasmagoria showed that high-budget, mainstream PC games could depict gruesome content previously restricted to adult film. The game did not shy away from its mature rating given by the ESRB and European nations like the UK and Germany, making strong efforts to warn viewers about the adult content in its marketing, box warnings, and censoring options. Phantasmagoria has greatly influenced the gore genre by its usage of FMV to achieve graphic realism, which paved the way for future interactive horror projects. Blood, 1997. Next, at number 5, we have a game that is literally called Blood, sarcastic. Wonder what that contains? Blood was a 2.5D first-person shooter developed by Monolith Productions using the Build engine and published by GT Interactive in 1997 for the DOS. The game took the established formula of interactive level design for shooting games and ramped up the carnage and dark satire to an 11. You control Caleb, an undead gunslinger seeking vengeance against the evil god Chernobog and his cult known as the Cabal. Some of the grim scenes you were in for included highly interactive mutilations of enemies and environments, enemies exploding into splatter fountains, and the use of unconventional weapons like flare guns to combust your foe. The gameplay was intricate and deep, rewarding tactical prowess instead of just spraying and praying. Blood pushed the envelope of gothic horror, mixed with a sick, twisted sense of humor, having Caleb mock his enemies with pop culture references or some horrible puns across many levels, while toying with ritualistic imagery and blasphemous shrines. While Blood did not trigger any changes in policy with the already established ESRB, it pushed the Build engine technology forward alongside contemporaries like Duke Nukem 3D, and was one of the first games on the engine to include voxels for detailed objects and to feature simulated rooms above rooms, which allowed for more complex and realistic-looking level architecture. Postal, 1997. Next, it's time to get uncomfortable. For number 6, Postal was a 1997 isometric top-down shooter video game developed by Running with Scissors and published by Ripcord Games for the DOS. The game puts you in the shoes of the unnamed Postal Dude, a mentally unstable man carrying out a nihilistic massacre across the fictional town of Paradise, Arizona. He is convinced he is the only person unaffected by a hate plague that the U.S. Air Force has released over his town. Sarcastic. Someone's tinfoil hat is on too tight. Postal involves indiscriminate killing of unarmed civilians, all from a detached top-down perspective. Some of the gratuitous violence includes executing characters like innocent bystanders, marching band members, and townspeople who have been injured and are crawling on the ground. What made Postal truly unique was that there was no heroic narrative, only the completion of a self-driven, unjustified bloodlust. As you can imagine, it faced immense scrutiny in the ongoing public debate over video game violence. The game was actually banned in 14 countries, including Malaysia, Sweden, and Germany. Did you know the game was also sued by the US Postal Service, albeit unsuccessfully, to stop people from saying "Go Postal," which was used to describe the violence committed by disgruntled postal workers in the 70s. Postal's violent content, dark humor, and satirical take on societal issues sparked debates about free speech and the impact of video games on culture. Heretic, Shadow of the Serpent Riders, 1996. Next, at lucky number 7, we have Heretic. The first-person shooter game was developed by Raven Software and published by ID Software for MS-DOS in 1994, and a retail version called Heretic. Shadow of the Serpent Riders was later released. At first glance, it looks all too similar to Doom. Well, that is because the game utilized the same engine to deliver a world drenched in dark magic and demonic iconography. You play as Corvus, an elven warrior, and your goal is to slay the corrupted Serpent Riders. The game's violence featured distinct fantasy gore, with enemies like gargoyles and undead foes bursting into green goo and bones upon death, achieving a medieval form of digital carnage. Heretic was a pioneer for the FPS genre, introducing a functional inventory system and the ability to look up and down, adding verticality to combat. While not a major player in the video game controversy section, the use of demonic and blasphemous imagery found in its environments and enemy designs did get it likened to Doom, and with that came the usual groups that were outraged by the game's message. Hexen, 1995. The next number directly follows the carnage of Heretic. Hexen, Beyond Heretic was the 1995 sequel that was developed by Raven Software and published by ID Software for MS-DOS. Hexen amplified the dark fantasy horror established in Heretic, casting the player as one of 3 distinct classes: fighter, named Baratus, cleric, named Parius, or mage, named Daedalon, each with unique ability. You battled the third Serpent Rider, Korax, across a series of dark, interconnected hub worlds filled with macabre architecture and ritualistic dungeons. Some key disturbing elements included high fantasy mutilation and persistent digital splatter from enemies like the Afrits and gruesome, decapitated centaurs. Instead of linearly moving from one level exit to the next, you needed to solve complex puzzles, often backtracking between maps and manipulating environment switches. Similar to its predecessor, Hexen got an M rating from the ESRB, mainly for its oppressive, gothic visual design, heavy occult, and demonic themes.
It was a terrifying dream. You had it too?
Yes, the same one. The descent into hell.
I need a stiff drink after that nightmare.
Hell, a cyberpunk thriller, 1994. Penultimate number 9 is Hell. Like, literally, Hell, a cyberpunk thriller, was released in 1994, developed by Take-Two Interactive Software and published by GameTech for the DOS. Utilizing early full motion, the game's shock factor wasn't derived from high-fidelity splatter, but from its genuinely macabre themes of state-sponsored terror, paranoia, and existential dread. The game is set in a dystopian 2095, and the United States of America is under the control of a brutal fascist theocratic dictatorship called the Hand of God. The sickening parts of the game include low-quality sequences that punish you for taking too long to move forward by sentencing you to hell. Unlike contemporaries that focused on fantasy gore, Hell engages with adult and political horror and feels more like an interactive, feature-length sci-fi film. The game diverges from more traditional corporate espionage cyberpunk by introducing supernatural elements like demons and a religious underworld. Despite being a commercial success, a lot of criticism was directed towards its lack of activities for the user, and one reviewer went as far as to label it the 12th worst computer game ever released. Alone in the Dark, 1992, and finally, at number 10, we have Alone in the Dark. The game was developed and published by Infogrames in 1992 for MS-DOS and can be considered the original blueprint for the survival horror genre. You assumed the role of either Edward Carnby or Emily Hartwood to investigate the haunting of Durcedo Mansion. It utilized fixed, cinematic camera angles that deliberately obscured threats, forcing constant paranoia. The gore in the game included highly graphic deaths, depicted with early polygonal mutilation and splatter of enemies like ghouls, winged night gaunts, and zombie chicken. Alone in the Dark was one of the first games to combine detailed, pre-rendered 2D backgrounds with controllable 3D polygonal characters, which is said to have directly influenced the development of games such as Resident Evil and Silent Hill. The game was immensely popular both critically and commercially, and was praised for utilizing suspense and helplessness, not blood and guts, to deliver its shocks. Marvelous verdict! And that was our list for today. Did you enjoy the list? Which of these was your favorite? Is there a particular gore classic that we seem to have missed? Comment them down below. As always, please like, share, and comment on the video. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be the first to be notified of all things marvelous. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.